what's with President Bill Clinton as soon as he's out of office? And we're not talking like, hello, God, it's so great to see you.
She was on national television, millions of people watching, when she said something that was never meant to go that far. I have been in the position, not with my current marriage, where I have been betrayed. Her first husband saw it live. He texted her immediately. She apologized, but the damage was done, and the secret she had been protecting for years was suddenly sitting in the open for everyone to see. The confession that cracked everything open. On that Good Friday, 2024, Megyn Kelly was interviewing Bishop Robert Barron, and what came out of her mouth was not a political take or a sharp legal argument. It was a confession from a woman who had spent 18 years carrying a secret that her own faith would not let her put down. Here is what most people never knew. When Megyn divorced her first husband, Daniel Kendall, in 2006, she was already a practicing Catholic. And in the Catholic Church, a civil divorce does not dissolve a sacramental marriage. The law says the marriage is over, but the Church says it is, not without a formal annulment from a church tribunal. Without that annulment, her 2008 marriage to Douglas Brunt was, in Catholic terms, irregular. She could not receive the Eucharist. She could not go to confession and receive absolution. She was living in a quiet, spiritual exile from the faith she was raised in, and she had been living there for 16 years without saying a word about it publicly. She had finally started the annulment process, and instead of bringing her peace, it was making everything worse. The process required her to submit detailed private documents about her first marriage to a panel of church officials she had never met and would never meet. She described what that felt like with a rawness that was unusual, even for someone who has always spoken her mind. I am submitting these forms about my first marriage to whom? Who are these people who get to review my personal private details and pass judgment on my marriage? She had tried attending an Episcopal chapel, hoping it might feel close enough to home. It did not. Her Jewish cardiologist had told her that in Judaism, you go directly to God without any intermediary institution deciding whether your prayers count, and something about that idea appealed to her in a way that made her feel both relieved and guilty for feeling relieved. By the time she sat down with Bishop Barron, she had not observed Lent that year. She had not gone to church on Ash Wednesday. She was, by her own admission, drifting. "I am feeling kind of emotional just talking about it," she said on air, voice already unsteady. And here is the angle nobody takes on this. Megyn Kelly can face down a sitting president. She can say no to Roger Ailes when her entire career is in his hands. She can rebuild from a national humiliation at NBC with nothing but her own voice and a podcast studio. She survived a stalker, 16 months of death threats, her son in the ICU, and the death of her sister. But she cannot make peace with a form. She cannot get closure from a tribunal she never chose. The one institution in her life that was supposed to offer unconditional belonging is the one telling her to prove, on paper, that something which already ended was never truly real. That is where this marriage story ends. But to understand how she got there, you have to go back to the beginning. And the beginning is not a marriage. It is a casket. And it arrived 10 days before Christmas. The wound she carried into every relationship. 10 days before Christmas in 1985, Megyn Kelly was 15 years old. The tree was already up in the family home in Albany, New York. Her father, Edward Kelly, was a 45-year-old professor who had gone to the emergency room a few days earlier, complaining of chest pains. The doctors sent him home. They said it was heartburn. He came back. He sat down on the living room couch and looked at the Christmas tree. That was the last image Megyn ever had of her father alive. Her sister woke her in the middle of the night. "Wake up. Daddy had a heart attack." He was gone. He was 45 years old, and he had canceled his life insurance policy shortly before he died, leaving his wife and 3 children not only devastated by grief, but financially exposed in a way nobody had prepared for. Megyn Kelly has talked about this moment with a rawness that does not seem like performance. "My last sight of him was of him sitting on the couch, looking at the Christmas tree. What I wouldn't give now to have that moment back." She kept journals in the years after his death, and in one entry written 3.5 years later, she wrote, "I feel so helpless sometimes. We are here for such a short time." That sentence shaped everything. The 15-year-old girl who wrote those words never stopped believing them. She spent the next 2 decades running forward at a pace that made sense only if you understood she had learned early that time runs out without warning. Her father used to give her vocabulary drills, and when she fell behind, he would say, "Megyn, I will not lower my vocabulary to meet yours. You must raise yours to meet mine." She carried that into every room she entered for the rest of her life. But there is something grief does when it is never fully processed. It does not disappear. It goes underground. It surfaces later in the choices you make about who to love, how much to demand from love, and when to finally walk away from something that is not working. In 7th grade, a group of girls who had been her friends turned on her and spent a year making her life miserable. She described that period as a year of torture, adding that when the messages keep coming back that you don't fit in, you're not likable, you don't have friends, it's hard. She learned to suppress her emotions. She built walls. She became, over time, someone who could walk into a hostile room and look completely composed while carrying a significant amount of pain. That is the woman who fell into her first marriage. That is the woman who eventually got out of it. And it all started with something she could not yet name. The first marriage and the truth that finally slipped out. Megyn Kelly met Daniel Kendall at a street festival in Chicago in the late 1990s. He was a 3rd-year medical student. She was working brutal hours as a litigation associate at a Chicago law firm, billing over 3,000 hours a year at a place where the internal culture had one rule: kill or be killed. She wrote in her memoir about the trap of that life. Working in law is like a pie-eating contest in which the prize is more pie. She had actually reached a crisis point before the marriage. Driving to work on the Kennedy Expressway around 2002, she had a thought that horrified her. She found herself fantasizing about getting into a car accident, nothing catastrophic, just significant enough to get her out of the office for a few weeks. She went home and wrote in her journal that night, "I am more excited than this. I am more interesting than this. I am more interested in this. I need more out of life. I want out." She left law. She made a sample reel, sent it to television stations, and when she told her Jones Day colleagues she was leaving to become a local news reporter, they looked at her like she had 3 heads. She left anyway. And finding professional happiness for the first time exposed something she had been avoiding in her personal life. She and Daniel Kendall had dated for nearly 4 years. They married on September 29, 2001, just 18 days after September 11th. They moved together through Chicago, New York, and Baltimore. They had no children. The official story when they divorced in 2006 was that it was amicable, that they were at different places about starting a family, that 2 demanding careers and mismatched personalities had quietly worn the marriage down. Both of them told that version for years. But in 2011, During her Fox News coverage of the Anthony Weiner scandal, Megyn Kelly said something on air that landed differently. "I have been in the position, not with my current marriage, where I have been betrayed." She named nobody. She gave no details. But the implication was there and people heard it. Daniel Kendall heard it. He reached out immediately. He told the Daily Mail in 2015, "I can say with 100% certainty that I was completely faithful to Megyn." When she made that comment, it irritated me a bit because it seemed like she was suggesting it was me. I texted her at the time and she apologized. He also said something about the marriage that is more honest than most divorce statements ever get. "I wanted a wife and she wanted a wife. We both needed someone to cook and clean and support us." He said she needed a type B husband, someone who was not competing with her but holding steady beside her. He was not wrong about what she needed. What he could not have known was that the person who matched that description was about to appear in an email she almost deleted. The blind date, the stalker, and the worst first kiss in history. In 2006, an acquaintance sent Megyn Kelly an email suggesting she meet a man named Douglas Brunt. He had apparently seen her on Fox News and admired her. The woman making the introduction thought they might connect. Megyn let the email sit in her inbox for months. Something told her not to delete it. Eventually, she said yes. Douglas Brunt was not what she had spent her previous relationships being drawn to. He was calm in a way that felt unfamiliar. He was funny without performing it. He was a former CEO of a cybersecurity company called Authentium, a man who had spent years commuting between New York and Florida, managing a dysfunctional board, and becoming someone he did not recognize. He was, at the time they met, quietly miserable in his own career and not yet ready to say so out loud. Before the first date, Megyn was so nervous that she sent her girlfriends ahead to the tapas bar in Washington to do reconnaissance. She wanted them to text her when Brunt arrived to confirm he did not seem like a problem. They texted back that he was, in her words, super cute. She showed up, sat down, and found herself, as she described it, mesmerized. She wrote about him in her journal and called him Dream Date Doug. Her mother's response to that was a single gentle correction. Just Doug could work too. Here is the part of this story that people always underestimate. When Douglas Brunt started dating Megyn Kelly, she had an active, credible stalker requiring around-the-clock armed security. Every date they went on in those first months was chaperoned by armed guards. Brunt described it in a Humans of New York interview at the Met Gala in 2016 with the kind of detail that is both funny and alarming at the same time. "We were chaperoned like a couple of high school sophomores going to the prom. These were guys who clearly had experience with weapons and taking people down. And I did not want to be taken down by anyone." The first kiss happened with the security detail standing right there watching. Brunt leaned in. Megyn leaned in. The guards watched. The kiss happened, and it was, by all accounts, a disaster. Megyn was blunt about it afterwards. "It was not my best. I am going to be honest." The next morning, she made a decision. She told her security detail to wait in the car. She went to Brunt's hotel room alone, knocked on the door, and when he opened it, she said 4 words that told him everything he needed to know about who she was. "I can do better." That was the moment Douglas Brunt understood he had met someone genuinely unlike anyone he had ever known. They began a long-distance relationship, and it was going well until New Year's Eve, when a dog leash nearly ended the whole thing before it could become what it eventually became. The night they broke up and what happened the morning after. They were walking their dogs on New Year's Eve. One of them was named Bailey. Douglas was holding the leash, and for one moment he lost his grip. and Bailey ran into the street. A car came close. Bailey survived. What came next did not. Megyn came at him hard. He snapped back. The argument escalated in the way that arguments do when they are not really about what they appear to be about. They were not fighting about a dog. They were fighting about whether this relationship had a future, about whether two people with enormous ambitions and significant emotional walls could actually build something together, about whether the risk of fully loving someone was worth the cost of being wrong about them again. By midnight, they had broken up. They went to separate parts of the apartment, and in the morning, something shifted. Megyn described what happened in her memoir as the single most important conversation of her life. They sat down, and they were honest with each other in a way that neither of them had been in a relationship before. All the performance fell away. Brunt let his defenses down. She let hers down. Everything that had been circling the edges of the relationship for months came out directly and clearly. And what came out of that honesty was a clarity neither of them expected. They were in love, and they had been sabotaging it because loving someone completely is one of the most frightening things a person can do, especially when you have already watched a marriage end and already know what the loss of someone feels like. Megyn wrote about what she understood in that moment. "I knew this man would someday be my husband. I had officially gotten the message: more risk, more imperfection, more openness and honesty in my work, my friendships, and my love life." 10 days after that conversation, Fox News called with a transfer offer to New York City, putting her and Douglas in the same city for the first time. She knew what that meant. The relationship was going to be tested properly now. Either it would hold, or it would not. It held. In approximately September 2007, Douglas Brunt went to a costume store and bought a fake gemstone ring modeled after the heart of the ocean from the movie Titanic. He took Megyn to a bench by the sea in Beach Haven, New Jersey, and he proposed. He later said, "She took so long to answer that I thought I had just made a total fool of myself." She said yes. They were married on March 1st, 2008 at Oheka Castle on Long Island. Fox News colleague Kelly Wright officiated. All three of their children, Edward, Yardley, and Thatcher, were later conceived through IVF. Douglas sold his company and walked away from the corporate world entirely to become a novelist, with Megyn as his first reader on every manuscript. His debut became a New York Times bestseller. She became the sole high-earning breadwinner at $15 to $23 million a year, and neither of them seemed to have any problem with the arrangement. They had built something that worked, and then the world spent the next several years trying to take it apart. The Predator, The President, and the NBC disaster. 3 crises arrived across 3 different years, and each one would have been enough to destroy most marriages on its own. The first one started in the summer of 2005, before she even met Douglas, but its weight would sit inside their marriage for the entire time they were together. Roger Ailes, the chairman of Fox News and one of the most powerful figures in American broadcasting, called Megyn into his office. He locked the door. Over the course of hours, he shifted between professional advice and sexual advances, making comments about her appearance, offering implications about what professional advancement might require from her, and at one point, physically trying to kiss her and grab her. When she refused him, he looked at her and asked, "When is your contract up?" She reported it immediately to a supervisor. The supervisor told her Ailes was likely just smitten and sent her back to work. She stayed silent for 11 years, not out of weakness, but out of calculation. Realistically, that would have been a sabotage mission for me and my career. I wasn't Megyn Kelly of today. When Gretchen Carlson's lawsuit cracked the story open in 2016, Megyn came forward. She wrote about it in her memoir. She attended a private screening of the film Bombshell in early 2020, which dramatized the events at Fox News alongside former colleagues who had experienced similar things. She cried in a way that was not for the cameras. She looked at a colleague beside her and said, "I've looked back on my own life, and I do wish I had done more. Even though I was powerless, even though it would have been a sabotage move for me career-wise, what if I had just said, 'Screw it'? Maybe that wouldn't have happened to you." Douglas was with her that night. He has never described in detail what it was like to watch his wife carry that, but he said this in a separate interview. "You see this person that you love getting attacked, and you want to protect them and help them." The second crisis arrived in August 2015, when Megyn moderated the first Republican primary debate and asked Donald Trump a direct question about his language toward women. Trump's retaliation on CNN the next day included a comment about blood coming from her wherever, and what followed, that was 16 months of armed security for her and her family. She described it to NPR as "my year of guards and guns." Strange men appeared at her apartment demanding to see her. People cased her home. Her children were looking out the windows afraid. Trump's lawyer retweeted a message calling for someone to gut her. A Fox executive called the lawyer directly and said, "If Megyn Kelly gets killed, it is not going to help your candidate." The lawyer did not appear to care. Douglas Brunt, on Fox News during the height of the feud, described his wife with a single sentence: "He knocked everybody off balance except for her." The third crisis was the most public humiliation of her career. In October 2018, and on her NBC morning show, Megyn Kelly made a comment suggesting that blackface was acceptable in the context of Halloween costumes when she was a child. The backlash was immediate and total. Her colleague Al Roker rebuked her publicly. The show was effectively over within 48 hours. She appeared one final time to deliver a tearful on-air apology. "I want to begin with 2 words. I am sorry." Her employment at NBC officially ended on January 11, 2019. She was paid $30 million for the remainder of her contract. No major talent agency would represent her. The world that had welcomed her with such visible enthusiasm 2 years earlier had closed every door. She did not collapse. She went quiet for a while, and then she built something herself from the ground up. But the losses kept coming even after that, and some of them had nothing to do with a camera. The tragedies nobody televised, and the marriage that held anyway. In March 2022, Megyn and Douglas took their 3 children skiing in Montana. Their youngest son, Thatcher, was 8 years old. He fell approximately 10 feet onto rocks. He lacerated his spleen. He bled internally. He spent 5 days in the intensive care unit. Megyn talked about it on her podcast weeks later with a shaking voice. The amount of stress and the love that you have for your children, and the fragility of these little bodies who totally depend on you. He recovered fully. But a fear like that, the fear of watching your child in a hospital bed, does not leave the body. It becomes part of you. Then, in October 2022, her older sister Suzanne died suddenly. She was 58 years old. She died of a heart attack, the exact same cause that had taken their father when Megyn was 15 years old. The wound that had defined everything about who Megyn became, the one that drove her to keep moving, to keep achieving, to never stop, reopened in a way that nothing in her adult life had prepared her for. She announced it on her podcast without any warning, her voice already unsteady before she had finished the first sentence. "Something really sad happened in my family over the weekend. My sister died. She died suddenly on Friday of a heart attack." She revealed that Suzanne had been drawn into the opioid crisis through a doctor who told her a minor painkiller was not addictive. But Suzanne had gotten clean. She had rebuilt her life. And then, with no warning, she was gone. The same way their father was gone. The same cause. The same absence of preparation. At 15, Megyn had asked her mother, "Will you ever be happy again?" She was now in her 50s, facing the same question herself. And then, just months after her sister died, she was sitting across from Bishop Robert Barron on Good Friday confessing that her faith, the one institution she had always come back to, was no longer holding her the way it once did. The annulment process was pulling her further from the church rather than toward it. She was being asked to submit intimate details of a marriage that had already ended to strangers who would decide whether it had been real enough to erase spiritually. She was a woman who had spent her entire adult life refusing to let anyone have that kind of power over her. And now the institution she had loved since childhood was the one asking for it. She was not done. She was still broadcasting, still building, still showing up. She and Douglas appeared together at the Time 100 Gala in April 2025. They sat side by side through the U.S. Open in September of that same year. They disagreed publicly in early 2026 about the Iran strikes, and she said on air with a warmth that made the disagreement feel like evidence of something rather than a threat to it. "I will be honest, Doug and I are split on this." Douglas Brunt, when asked what makes their marriage work after everything, said something specific enough to be worth quoting directly. "It is not all rainbows and unicorns with us. We work on things. We have very frank and honest conversations with each other when we find something annoying. We do not let that fester. We just put it on the table and talk it through." That sentence is the inheritance of New Year's Eve. It is what came out of a fight about a dog leash that was never really about a dog leash. The habit of saying the hard thing before it becomes a larger thing is a skill you have to build deliberately, and it does not come naturally to anyone, especially not to two people who spent years learning to protect themselves. Megyn said on her Sirius XM show in 2022, "I was mesmerized by you and remain mesmerized by you." There is a journal entry I kept at the time. I wrote something to the effect of, "Is it possible that this guy loves me and is not a serial killer? There has got to be a shoe to drop here because he is too good." And now, 15 years of marriage later, it is not fake. You are real. She has said the most honest thing on record about what he means to her in a sentence that does not leave room for interpretation. "Nothing in my life has been as fulfilling to me as that relationship and the goodness that stems from it. The beauty and the love I see and feel toward my kids, it all started there." Here is what this story is actually about. The divorce the title promised did happen. Megyn Kelly divorced Daniel Kendall in 2006. And the thing that happened immediately after, the thing that triggered the divorce, was not a single dramatic event. It was the quieter and more devastating thing of finding professional happiness for the first time, which lit up by contrast exactly how unhappy her marriage was. She had been settling in the one place you should never settle. The divorce from Kendall was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of a different question. What does it actually look like to build something real, rather than something that just looks right from the outside? The answer turned out to involve a blind date email that almost got deleted, a fake ring from a costume shop, A New Year's Eve fight about a dog that was never about a dog. 3 children conceived through IVF. A career that fell apart twice and got rebuilt twice. 16 months of armed security. A predator in the building who went unnamed for 11 years. A sister dying the way a father died. A son in the ICU. And a woman kneeling at the edge of her own faith, asking whether any of the institutions she trusted had ever truly known her. That is the actual story of Megyn Kelly's marriage. Not a scandal, not a breakup. Something harder to hold and far more worth understanding. A marriage that was forged under pressure that would have ended most relationships and chose, every single day, to keep being honest instead. We would love to know which part of this story hit you hardest. Drop your thoughts in the comments below, because this is a conversation worth having.